it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Arizona, the state of great contrasts, home to one of the world's greatest natural wonders, and also one of the largest cities in America, as well as being home to many stories of nightmarish encounters in the mountains and on the highways, as we will see in tonight's collection of 4 stories. Angels of Darkness, Serpents of Light. I was driving back from the Easter Sunday gold mine. That's somewhere between Bisbee and Douglas, a few miles north of the Mexican border. I'm retired, but I still consult as a geological and mining engineer on the side. With the price of gold so high, a group of investors was considering buying the claim and reopening the mine. They wanted me to see what shape it was in. It had taken longer than I'd expected at the mine. Even Juan's muscles were tired after hauling the heavy gear up the hill to the mine entrance. The shaft was clear. Unfortunately, much of the adit was caved in. Rachel had to squeeze between the rocks to get the samples, but that's why I'd hired these kids. They were both mining engineering students from Arizona State University, and I always tried to give the next generation of engineers practical experience. When we were done, I should have just followed Juan and Rachel up Arizona Route 80 to I-10 back to Phoenix. The sunset was beautiful as I drove along AZ-80, so I stupidly turned west onto a dirt road somewhere near Tombstone. I was looking for a pretty place to stop and take a picture. Maybe 5 miles from the AZ-80, I saw a small plane land on the connecting north-south roads. I saw them turn the plane around, and when it took off, a big, white king cab pickup truck with dark windows started heading in my direction. Well, everyone here knows what comes off those airplanes that land in the middle of nowhere. Black tar heroin, cocaine, speed, or even just marijuana, but they all spell trouble. I turned the truck around and started back to the highway, but that road was one long washboard. That fancy king cab was kissing my bumper, and the driver was furiously pounding on the horn. I looked at the rearview mirror. 2 angry men looked back. The passenger pointed to me and ran his finger across his throat. About halfway back to the main road, a herd of javelina crossed right in front of me. Those piggies are built like bricks. You don't just damage your front end, you roll your truck when you hit one. Well, instinct took over, and I hit the brakes. As I skidded to a stop, I felt their truck smash into my bumper. My airbag slammed into my face. I was stunned. Everything smelled like gunshots, and the truck cab was filled with talcum powder. Before I could even get my insurance information from the visor, my door was flung open. They ripped me out of my truck and threw me into the dirt. The 2 macho men loomed over me, and one shouted, "You stopped too damn fast." "I'm sorry," I said meekly. "I have insurance and towing." "You're gonna pay, little man." "Everything will be paid. No deductible, I promise." "Oh, you will pay." He ripped my cell phone from its holster, crushed it, and flung it into the brush. "You'll pay with your life." While the second one watched, the first one went back to their truck and pulled out 2 samurai swords. He kept one and tossed a second to his partner. "Run, old man. Run to the hills. When we catch you, we cut you into pieces." Well, I ran for my life, as they herded me further and further away from everything that I thought might be able to save me. They drove me away from the road and up the hill, whooping and laughing behind me. I had one chance, and it required me to run them to death. Those brawny mustachios saw me as just a skinny old man they could slice up for fun. But I'm a vegan, and I run 5 miles every day. As I ran, I silently prayed for help. I prayed to the Virgin, asking her to intercede with the Father because I needed my prayers answered mighty fast. Oh, the course got harder as I ran up the hill, but a voice spoke inside me. It said that gravity and exhaustion worked even more on their nacho and beer guts than skinny old me. It also reminded me of another secret advantage: hiking shoes instead of their slick-soled cowboy boots. Oh, the further they slipped behind me, the more confident I felt. But then I got careless. I heard the hiss of a scared rattlesnake. When I looked down, I saw my foot going down on the back of a Mojave green rattler. The poor snake replied the way snakes do. With the speed of lightning, he clamped his fangs deep into my leg. His mouth felt like a bear trap. Then he let go and slithered away. The snake didn't wake up and decide to bite me. I was Godzilla destroying his Tokyo. Because he'd used up all his venom on my leg, he was probably going hungry tonight. Still, I was terrified. Everyone knows Mojave greens are the most venomous snakes in North America. I had nobody but myself to blame for letting my grandkids talk me into those fancy Gore-Tex hiking shoes instead of my old cowhide boots. But that didn't take the pain away or make the venom any less deadly. I begged to St. Barbara, the patron saint of miners, to intercede for me now. My family had trusted St. Barbara for generations. Every mine they began always had a statue of St. Barbara placed near the future tunnel portal during the groundbreaking. I did the same, and had a sterling silver St. Barbara medallion that had been blessed by Pope John around my neck. My daddy had taught me a prayer he'd learned as a boy from his daddy back in Czechoslovakia, and with all the might I had, I prayed it now. Oh, St. Barbara, you who opened your mind to the light of faith through the work of reason, pray that my mind and heart might be ever open to truth, and I may embrace it with all the strength of my soul. Embracing this truth as you did, obtain for me the grace to persevere in all trials. Beseech your divine Savior and mine to protect me from the dangers that press upon me. Faithful Jesus, you who define yourself as truth, shield me with your protection as you covered your beloved servant Barbara. Amen. Well, I knew that running was about the worst thing I could do on a snake bite because I was pushing that toxin all around my body. My calf was scalded, and I could feel my foot swelling in my shoe. Giving up would be so easy. But that voice inside me said I had a wife, children, and grandchildren. Pain or not, I had to keep running. I could hear their curses behind me. Every breath was a fight. Finally, I stumbled, fell, and couldn't get up. There, I would die. Instead, something incredible happened. I looked up and saw two angels lifting me up. All my life I'd thought angels had wings. Everyone said they had wings, even in It's a Wonderful Life. Oh, they did not. One was tiny, so short she looked no older than a child. Her skin was dark and her nose was amazingly big. I am St. Barbara, she said with a power that electrified me. Your prayers have been heard by the Father, and he has sent us here to answer them. The second angel was dark as ebony. His nose was broad and his lips were full. I'm St. Augustine of Hippo. You've lived a good life and not returned evil for evil. But pacifism in the face of a grave wrong that you can stop by violence is a sin. It's God's will for you to defend your life and stop their sin. How? I asked. I can't even walk. Those that fight with you are more than those that seek your life. You'll be strengthened to make it possible. Look at your adversaries and behold. I glanced behind me and saw two other angels. One had a great sword of fire, and the other wielded a spear of lightning with both hands. God sent them to hold back Satan's legions. I looked beyond them to the drug mules and saw two forms. They were dressed just like the four angels. One was a tall man that had a perfect blonde Aryan face and cold, heartless eyes that thousands of SS Death's head troops only could dream of. The other was a petite Oriental woman with a demure face and that beautifully thick and black Japanese hair. I looked at them in astonishment. Those are demons. Well, aren't demons all... Only in art, said St. Augustine. Satan transforms himself into an angel of light. So do his disciples. They make good look evil and evil look good. Soon I could see my truck. The door was still open, and the angels threw me in. We'll have to leave soon, St. Barbara said. God loves you and loves your dear wife Maria. Her prayers bring delight in heaven. put the key in the ignition, turned it, and absolutely nothing happened. The truck wouldn't turn over. I knew the fuel pump shut off because of the accident, but I didn't have time to start poking around for the reset switch. So out of time, I grabbed the truck gun I kept under my seat. It was an old pistol one of my sons gave me. Genuine made in Bulgaria, and Bubba had spray painted it baby poop green, but he'd bought it dirt cheap and it always went bang. Now, I didn't want to kill. I was a sissy vegan that never shot anything but paper and pop bottles in my life. But the voice of St. Augustine thundered through my whole body. Their wrongdoings compel you to wage war against them. You must defend the life of all their victims, even though it be through violence. If you do not, the sin will be upon you for defying God's will to prevent far great wrongs. The sin will be upon you for defying God's will to prevent far greater wrongs. The first narco-bandit to the truck was the one that had tossed me out earlier. He opened up that door again. Was he ever surprised when I swung that gun up and cancelled his ticket? An even more horrible surprise happened next. That sweet little Japanese girl smiled, showing long teeth as she pulled the soul right out of him. His soul glowed a dull yellow, and his face filled with sheer terror. The universe behind him whirled, opening a spiral vortex in the ground. I could see the flames of hell. Thousands of tortured souls screamed and scrambled desperately to escape. She pushed them back as tentacles snaked out and dragged that drug runner down to the pits of eternal torment. Then she dived in and sealed the door behind her. Nothing I'd ever seen or heard could have prepared me for that. Stay focused, St. Augustine said. Keep in the now. Focus on what you need to do next. The second drug runner had shock in his eyes. I leveled the heavy gun at him. The Nazi silently waited. If I killed that cameo, I'd be condemning him to a hell that was more awful than my worst imagining. And so I said, drop it. The demon's ice-cold blue eyes met mine, a smile on his face. Kill him, he roared. The narco raised the sword, yelled, and tried to hack me in two. Fire, St. Augustine thundered. And I did. I emptied the gun into him, and he landed near my feet, gurgled and shook a couple of times, and then bled out. I put my hands over my ears and closed my eyes as I turned away, knowing what was next. Nothing could block out the shrieks of those damned souls. Their pain and suffering bored right through my skull like 1,000 dentist drills. I collapsed to the ground, crying. I just killed 2 people. Worse, I damned them for eternity to a hell more awful than I could ever have believed. You only did what God wanted to be done, said St. Augustine, standing before me. You need help, St. Barbara said. Call an ambulance. How? They smashed my phone and threw it away. By now I was sobbing, broken inside. She pointed at the phone hanging from the bullet-ridden corpse in front of me. Use that one. Well, 6 plus P hollow points in the chest messed him up bad, and I never was good around blood and gore. I didn't want to touch his body, but St. Augustine took me by the hand. It's no good. It's locked. Use his thumbprint. He left it behind. Somehow I managed to hold his hand up, unlock the phone, and call 911. Suddenly, I was alone. Well, my pain was indescribable, and I was struggling to breathe. I passed out. I came to in Copper Queen Community Hospital in Bisbee, my sweet wife by my side. The doctor told me I was lucky. There were 2 types of Mojave greens, the common deadly one and the rare but milder B type. That was another miracle for a fool like me. Well, thanks to that blessing, I even got to keep my leg. When I tried to explain about the angels and the 2 demons, the doctors told me that the snake bite had made me hallucinate. The hospital padre listened to my story politely, a look of skepticism on his face. Keep your vision sacred and private, he said. In other words, don't tell anyone or they'll think I'm loco. Eventually 2 cops came to the hospital and took my statement. They found almost 50 kilograms of fentanyl in the drug runner's truck, enough to kill everyone in the whole state of Arizona 5 times over. I told them everything that had happened, including the angels, but they too shrugged my experience off. Both the doctors and the police were unscientific in their pronouncement. As soon as I was able, I researched snake bites causing hallucinations, and found descriptions of people who were addicted to being bitten by cobras in India, and one case of someone describing euphoria and shimmering colors from a cobra bite. But not one word about hallucinations from rattlesnakes. I jumped to a conclusion without evidence, and against volumes of scientific literature. But, well, what's more logical? That a 70-year-old, 140-pound vegan who'd been bitten by the most deadly snake in North America could defeat 2 burly drug addicts in Mortal Kombat, or the angels had come down from heaven. I've seen some unsettling things as a truck driver. Thinking back on it, to this day, given that someone else experienced it with me, I'm certain that I'm not crazy. I was traveling through Arizona late one night because I had an early morning delivery, and chose to drive overnight because usually there's less traffic, and as long as you don't stop too frequently, you can usually get farther driving through the night than during the day. I'd recently got a dog, which I'd named Banjo. Yes, it's my favorite instrument. Well, I'd picked him up from the animal shelter where I live, and he's a great dog for the road, and an excellent navigator. Dogs also seem to have an innate sense for when things just aren't right, which plays into this story a bit later. Well, I'd been driving for about 9 of my 11 hours, and was set to arrive at the customer in a little over half an hour, leaving me plenty of time to drop and hook, then find a place to get some shut-eye. Well, I did not arrive to that customer at the appointed time. I like to think of myself as a good-hearted person, which is why when I saw a car on its side off to the side of the road, frame and metal twisted, I pulled over to check and make sure everything was okay. Pulled over, set the brakes, hopped out, and put on my emergency reflective triangles, then immediately rushed over to the car. Banjo began to growl very subtly. The driver's door was blocked against the ground. The windshield was smashed but not completely shattered, no doubt thanks to the laminated glass used for front windshields. There was blood all around the driver area, and possession strewn all around the car. I walked round to the other side of the mangled vehicle and saw blood dripping from the passenger door and onto the ground. Nobody was in sight, and I couldn't see any footprints or blood trails with my flashlight. Well, I immediately called 911 afterwards, gave them the location, a description of the scene, and told them I couldn't find the driver, but that there was blood leading off the vehicle. And I kept searching around until finally I saw the emergency lights. I walked over to the officer's patrol vehicle, informed him in more detail as to what I'd seen, and, being that the ambulance they called was still some time away, we decided to search for the driver of the vehicle. Although Arizona is an arid climate, it still gets very cold at night, and there are many things out in the desert that remind you that out here, you're not on top of the food chain, so it was vital that we found the driver. We began branching off in a V-shaped search pattern. He went left, I went right. We stayed just close enough that we could use the faint speck of a flashlight to signal if one of us found the driver. Well, about 5 minutes went by. I hadn't found the driver yet, and the officer hadn't signaled with his light either. Then I heard a very faint noise. Couldn't tell what it was at first, but it subtly grew in intensity. It was the most ominous sound I'd ever heard, so much so that I can't even begin to describe what it sounded like here. After about 10 seconds of listening to this sound and feeling the adrenaline kick in, I could hear my dog barking like mad back at my truck, and then a woman's scream. The officer must have heard that too, as we both pointed our flashlights at each other and ran to meet in the middle. When we linked back up, he asked me if I'd heard the scream, and I informed him I had. I looked down and there was a bloody footprint on the ground, leading further into the desert. It was definitely recent, The blood hadn't even begun to coagulate yet. We began hastily following the footprints. The more we followed, the more blood we saw. At this point, we're easily 1,000 feet away from the scene of the accident. And then the footprints just stopped. It was like they were never there. We searched in a circle around them, but couldn't find more. So we walked back a bit towards the accident. And the only prints were mine and the officer's. Well, we were dumbfounded. And then we heard the voice. It was a woman's voice. It said, "Did you come all this way looking for me? Oh, I'm sorry. I've had an accident. And soon you will too." Well, that kicked the adrenaline into overdrive, and I instinctively began backing away. The officer shone his light all around and said, "Ma'am, if you're injured, you need to come out so we can get you medical attention." I was still slightly backing away. Then I saw the officer's leg get torn into by nothing. There was nothing there. Oh, he cried in pain. It was deep, but not debilitating. Well, he had the same reaction I did, and we started into a full-on sprint to get back to our vehicles. My muscles were firing on all cylinders. The officers and I were side by side. My lungs and legs were on fire. I heard something closing in behind us, and Banjo was going berserk. I thought for sure I wasn't going to make it. The damn thing sounded like it was right behind us, like it was toying with us, losing ground and then gaining it back. We made it back to the accident, and I heard that ominous sound once more. Trying to regain our breath, we both realized that the car was gone. There was no vehicle on its side there. No blood, no broken pieces, no glass, just my truck and his patrol car. I heard the thing that was chasing us slowly recede back into the desert. Oh, both of us were so full of adrenaline we were shaking, and the blood was beginning to soak into his uniform. He grabbed the first aid kit out of his cruiser, and I helped him patch up the wound. The ambulance arrived 10 minutes later, to the scene of an accident that wasn't there. Knowing that no one would believe us, we made up the story that I'd had to stop because my engine was overheating, and on the way back to my truck to make sure I was all right, the officer had slipped and fallen, catching his leg on a rock. They ended up taking the officer to the hospital. I found out later that when he got there, it was like he had an infection. They had to remove the infected tissue, and he ended up needing 22 stitches afterwards. Well, call me superstitious, but I believe that talking about evil things gives that evil a pass back into your world, which is why this is the only time I've ever told this particular story, and why I never will again. Ash Fork in Arizona. Intelligence Report 5421/1B. Attached to evidentiary review of Incident 5421 in the state of Arizona. Lieutenant Brooks submitting supplemental information for case file. The following is a transcript of an audio file recovered from the Caldwell residence after a thorough search of the premise's basement. 95% of the basement walls were lined with American copper pennies of various styles, fastened with superglue and spaced out in half-inch intervals. Furnishings included one folding table and one folding chair. One corpse, a male in his mid-30s, was extracted and taken to our mobile lab for analysis. Preliminary reports suggest a self-inflicted gunshot to the head. Colt .45 pistol was recovered along with one bullet casing. One audio tape recorder was recovered from the basement. The information on the tape inside the player was used to create this file, which was re-recorded and cleaned by technicians, but quality remains problematic. Significant gaps or issues are noted in the transcript. The initial minutes of the recording appear to be rattling sounds and screeches conducive to microphone disruption. A few random words can be heard through the interference, but nothing clear enough for translation. The evidence suggests the subject didn't have experience working with the device. After approximately 3 minutes, the interference clears up. Transcript now begins. Caldwell. My name is Joseph Caldwell, for the record. I've lived in the town of Ash Fork in Arizona for most of my life. Not that I'm bragging about it. Small town next to a major highway. You know how it is. Well, we get a fair share of the tourist trade and business from travelers on their way to bigger cities and state parks, but shit, you don't care about that stuff. Let me... There was a clear editing cut of indeterminate length, and then Caldwell continues. Oh, crap, I hope I didn't just erase all that. Okay, well, to whoever's listening, you'll have to bear with me. This piece of junk is so old the manufacturers have been bankrupt for 40 years already. I didn't have time to grab my video camera and cell phone before I ran down here. I already had this tape device installed in the basement, so I could play narrations for the tour. I lost the instructions a while back, and I didn't have the money to go get something digital, so, well, there we are. I get to work with this stupid thing, and you get to listen. As you can guess, I'm still alive. The walls are holding them at bay, for now at least. I can hear them outside, hissing like the world's angriest cats. It's what passes for language for their type. Not just in the stairway, but in the ground around the basement. You can hear them in the ground. I mean, how does that work? I want to believe they'll go away eventually, chase easier prey. These things can't be all that patient, considering how quickly they can pounce on you. Then again, maybe they have all the time in the world. But not me. No, I don't know how much recording time I have, so I'll try not to ramble on and on. I'd really like to be drunk right now while I do this. Might take the edge off. But the beer's next to my camera, upstairs. Well, okay, here we go. You know my name and location, so I won't repeat myself. I might be telling you events you already know, or maybe this recording will get unearthed centuries from now. So I'll play it safe and assume you're in the dark about how things got to this point. A few years ago, we achieved a short-lived moment of pleasantness in our country's moods. The economy was doing okay. Healthcare had improved and deficits weren't as sky-high as they used to be. The world wasn't blowing itself up, and the usual squabbles over abortion and immigration were down to dull roars. Well, no one claimed life was rosy, but life was improving. So naturally, someone had to go and create a new dilemma for the players in the 24 hours news cycle to get their tongues twisted over. Yep, the penny. That penny. The same ones you see covering the room. Honest Abe's immortal face stamped on copper plating and zinc. I might have close to 10,000 of them covering the walls. It took me days to glue them on. The penny room's what I call it. Just in case the sign outside the house is gone. If you don't mind the smell of oxidizing copper and cleaning fluids, it's not a bad place to be. Of course, I never figured I'd be trapped in here. Anyway, it wasn't the first time somebody was arguing to get rid of the penny, but it actually worked this time around. The arguments were pretty good, that the penny costs more than 1 cent to make each, that the use of the penny slows down transaction time and hurts businesses, that inflation has risen so much that people treat pennies expendably, and that we are literally throwing money away. Vending machines have long since given up the use of pennies, so why not everyone else? But there were a few defenders, mostly allies of penny manufacturing, whose main argument was, wait for it, loss of jobs. Others said prices would rise to accommodate the removal of pennies, going from $19.99 to $20, for example. Oh, there were even a few wingnuts who claimed that eliminating the penny would hurt American pride and Lincoln's image. Yeah, like everybody really treated the penny with reverence. Despite what you might think, I was actually for penny removal. This penny room of mine, it's a gimmick. A way to add flair in a competitive tourist trade. Hey everybody, let's go see the guy who glued 10,000 pennies to his basement. Yeah, it's stupid, but it worked. People did show up to see my penny room, and in enough numbers to matter. It was a way to earn extra cash since part-time sales work at a dying home appliance store didn't cut it. And besides, what else could you do with all those pennies? Once Arizona followed the Midwestern states and started prohibiting penny use, plenty of people around here were more than happy to donate their pennies to me instead of surrendering them to government reclamation centers. Now, speaking of the government, the feds mostly stayed out of the issue, allowing each state government to make up its own mind on the issue of pennies. Considering what I found later, it was definitely one of those times the government should have gotten involved. Anyway, The anti-penny movement started in the Midwestern half of the country and spread quickly enough to encompass almost all the states west of the Mississippi River within a year. Arizona wasn't declared penniless until 3 months ago, the same time I'd come up with the penny room idea. The government might not have cared about my room, but I did have to get my ex-wife's blessing, since the house was still half hers. She laughed in my face, called my idea typical Joseph idiocy, and said that I'd need more than pennies to sell my penny room. She still let me do it, saying that this would make us even for her own major error in judgment while we were married. And no, I'm not telling you what that was. Some things should stay private between couples, even if she's probably dead by now. I bring up my ex because she did make a good point. I needed something else for the penny room. A good haunted house isn't just goblins and pumpkins on the doorstep. You need sound and effect. You need a hook to draw people in. So I decided to add some history, some patriotic nostalgia. That's what this damn recorder was for. Well, with the internet, finding the penny's history wasn't too hard, and, well, it's really boring. That's what. It's a coin. I mean, there's no controversy, no conflict. The composition of the metals have changed over the years, going from mostly copper with a little zinc to mostly zinc with a little copper, but that's it. Imagine trying to attract kids these days with trivia less exciting than a history lesson on cotton gins. Right about that time, I remembered watching a local news report about a brand new serial killer on the loose. The police had absolutely nothing to go on other than the killer's modus operandi of cutting and stabbing the victim 100 times over. Well, seems the killings were completely random, targeting anyone with a pulse. He or she was also quite speedy, with 12 kills over 5 states in less than 2 weeks. The police were starting to think there was more than one of them, perhaps a copycat or a cult. I didn't think much of it. Nasty business, but none of the killings were in Arizona. I was more interested in finding my hook, and I had to shift through a mountain of online garbage to find my virtual diamond. Well, the diamond's name was April Connor, a lady who lived in my neck of the woods, Flagstaff. There was a listing for her on a conspiracy website involving government cover-ups. Now, according to the site, she was a descendant of Horatio Connor, the true creator behind the 1909 Lincoln penny. A curious bit of trivia, since all the other US coin websites said that it was Victor David Brenner who'd suggested the design. You don't get too many conspiracy threads over the minting of coins, so I looked closer at the listing. She was still alive at the age of 69 and held office in Flagstaff for a few years. She'd used her political connections to get an audience with the Arizona State Congress last year for one purpose. She had argued, vehemently and passionately, to have the state keep the penny in circulation. Well, the debate hadn't gone her way, and she ended up getting labeled as a crackpot. She'd use phrases like national tragedy and complete ruin for our state if the penny went away. After the state government voted to go penny-free, she secluded herself at her home in Flagstaff to avoid media attention. Well, the one sympathetic soul who had climbed aboard her crazy train had written her into his website, complete with contact information. It made finding her easy enough. Now this was my hook, a crazy conspiracy to go with my room of pennies. I admit that it's a pretty lowbrow thing to do, but it was more exciting than the alternatives. Besides, I thought I might be doing April a favor. Maybe she'd want to be vindicated and acknowledged for her ill-fated public crusade. Well, she didn't want to be vindicated that badly because she wasn't even bothering to answer her phone or respond to messages. Fellow cooks and hate mailers were probably hammering her daily. Those types like to eat their own. So I ended up going straight to the, what the hell. In the background, slow and steady hissing can be overheard, rising in volume over the next 10 seconds. Clanking sounds and microphone disruption also ensue, implying that the tape recorder is being moved. The hissing is best described as snake-like, only more raspy and threatening. 10 more seconds pass before the hissing dies down and Caldwell speaks again. His voice is noticeably elevated. Damn, I think I'm still safe. It's louder, the hissing. Used to be I could only hear the hissing when I got close to the walls, but right now I'm sitting in the middle of the room, and I can hear them. I don't know if they're getting closer or if more of them are arriving. Do numbers matter? Yeah, numbers matter. They always matter. Dumb thing to say. Right. The story. April was incommunicado, so if I was going to get my hook, I was going to have to get persistent. After a week of phone calls, I drove down to her home in Flagstaff and presented myself in person. I think luck was with me that day because she was at home and surprisingly willing to open the door when I knocked. Dressed in a ratty-looking bathrobe and matching slippers at midday, she had this sunken look to her otherwise pleasant face that suggested either great fatigue or great sickness. Her grey hair was all over the place. Oh, you should have seen me roll out the charm. I didn't think I had that much charm in me. My ex-wife would certainly never have believed it. I apologized in advance for disturbing her and said that I was doing a book about the history of the penny and that I'd like to pick her brain about her grandfather. Well, I fully expected her to tell me to go jump in the little Colorado River and slam the door, but she didn't. Instead, she offered me tea and let me come in as long as I took off my shoes. She was mindful of the carpet. Her home was, well, normal. No piles of newspapers or walls covered in articles about the penny-free laws. There was one tabby cat, not 20. The tea, a mint variety, didn't kill me. At first I thought I'd somehow worm my way into her heart, but it was later on that I realized the real emotion behind her hospitableness. Resignation. I tried to avoid bringing up her penny crusade, hoping she'd do the job for me. After giving me the tea, she told me that she knew what I was here about. She didn't want to be lied to, coddled, patronized, or mocked. If my intentions were to ridicule her in a future publication, she'd use what time she had left to make my life miserable in any manner she could. But if I wanted the real story about the penny, then I could stay and listen. As if giving me a chance to digest her ultimatum, she turned her head to the television, an old clunker that was tuned to a cable news channel. While the sound was muted, the captions were informing us of the continuing serial killer crisis. Oh, I'd missed a bit. The fatalities had grown to over 3 dozen across 10 states, and one death matching the lethal MO was in Yuma, on the edge of Arizona. The killings had finally crept this way. Authorities were treating the killing spree as the work of a terrorist group, though no group had made demands or admitted responsibility. When the police were calling on the public for help in identifying assailants, you knew they had nothing to go on. It'll get worse, April mentioned absently as she watched. I didn't know what to make of her attitude, nor did I ask what she meant by that. Keep in mind, I still figured she was a cook at the time. But she had something I wanted, so I agreed to keep her name out of anything I used down the road. Kook or not, she probably had enough resources to make good on her threat. But I doubt she'd care that I'm exposing her in this recording. I doubt she's even alive. The first thing she did was to bring out her grandfather's diary, one of the few relics from Horatio Connor her family had held on to. Turns out that the Connor family didn't want this particular record to get out. Connor's diary contradicted much of written history concerning the Lincoln penny, as well as suggesting Connor was 50 cards short of a full deck. Yet April took all his words deathly serious. We read the pertinent passages together, those ones from 1908 to 1910, so that I didn't have just April's word to go on. Back in 1908, the current Secretary of the Treasury, Franklin McVeigh, had approached Connor in secret with designs on the new penny. Brenner had been officially commissioned for the job, but Connor's artistic eye and experience in the minting presses was slightly superior. If he could make a better Lincoln penny than Brenner, he'd get the acclaim. McVeigh was hedging his bets on getting the penny perfect, though he never explained why to Connor. He just paid him the same wages as Brenner and kept the deal silent. Using Abraham Lincoln's visage was a given, but they needed a perfect image, something that left no ambiguity and which people could rally behind. Most people saw Abraham Lincoln as a hero of the country, and even in the South, enough people respected him that the government believed the new design would meet little resistance nationally. Lincoln's legacy was also reasoned enough in the minds of the people that their belief in him would arouse more passion. That was important for some reason. Connor wrote about how rushed he was to create the die-cast, that McVeigh was surprisingly stressed out about the project and was always looking over his shoulder. McVeigh wasn't telling him the whole story, that was evident, and it made Connor suspicious. After finishing his part of the project, Connor went and poked his nose around. But before the government managed to threaten him into lying low, Connor discovered two things. One, McVeigh had absolutely demanded the use of copper in the coin. It was actually a hidden legal requirement. It didn't matter how much copper was in it, but the outer plating had to be copper. April had checked government records, and the statue remained in effect to this day. And two, the cleaning solution used to wash and polish the pennies as they came off the minting presses had a special additive not mentioned in the chemical's ingredient listing. The special additive was top secret. And Connor's reward for his snooping was to be kicked off the project. He claimed in his diary that Brenner and McVeigh stole his design and implemented it as the Lincoln penny, but he was too cowed by the government to sue or make a fuss. After two government agents visited him one day and threatened him with eternal incarceration, he realized that things were far more serious than just political wrangling over a new coin. He largely disappeared from the limelight after his participation, but his words were definitely conspiracy theory fuel. April's family was happy to shove the diary where the sun don't shine, but not April. Before his death, Grandpa Connor had actually given her the diary, telling her that somebody had to keep an eye on things after he was gone, and April seemed the most open-minded of the bunch. April admitted to me that the diary initially disturbed her, but Grandpa Connor had always seemed like a rational man. Maybe there was something to it. After the diary, April pulled out a massive briefcase full of papers from her investigations over the years. Here's a funny bit of trivia. Getting elected mayor of Flagstaff had actually been part of her secret crusade to uncover the truth. Better access to the government, you see. While she never found a memo or something blatantly incriminating, she had found enough material to form her own hypothesis over what the Lincoln penny's true purpose was, and she was perfectly happy to share her evidence with me. Oh, for a 69-year-old kook, she definitely knew her way around a computer. She had an archive of old footage copied from fringe websites, mostly ones talking about spirits and demons and such. She showed me an old black-and-white picture taken during the 1930s from a photographer at the Douglas Haven mining camp in Nevada. He caught on film what appeared to be a very small patch of faint fog or smoke drifting near a group of miners posing for a picture. The weird part was that you could see faces in the smoke. Nondescript, vaguely human faces. There were 5 or 6 of them that I could identify, and they all wore the same emotion. Rage. Turns out that 5 miners died at the site that year, and not from cave-ins or accidents. Added security didn't seem to help, and while the authorities believed a killer was on the loose, the miners claimed that they had a vengeful spirit in their midst. The killer was never caught, and the camp closed 2 months after the last death. I'd have chalked it up to bad photography and weird tales, but then April showed me a viral video from the web. 2 weeks ago, a family of 4 had been walking down a street in San Diego at night while on vacation. The youngest teenage son had his phone out in camera mode, and the family was doing the usual bullshitting people do in front of camera when the father is suddenly grabbed from out of nowhere and yanked down an alley they'd just passed. The son pursued his screaming father down the alley and continued to record while his mum and sister screamed for help. A few seconds later, he spots what looks like smoke or mist rising from his father's very bloody corpse. Just before the kid shuts off the recording, the mist seems to form a wrath-filled face before dissipating completely. Most people dismissed the video as doctoring. I remembered it getting mentioned once or twice on the news, but I poo-pooed it with everyone else. But that mist looked way too similar to the one in the mining camp photograph. I wasn't fully convinced of the connection until April showed me a dozen other photos, taken by various folks over the course of the last several decades, showing the same visibly upset mist. Time and again, each picture was taken before or after someone was horribly killed, usually stabbed dozens or even hundreds of times all over their bodies. Then she showed me records of similar incidents dated before 1909. She'd made a few charts to summarize her data. According to April, the number of deaths and disappearances fitting the killer miss description had begun to escalate from the 1860s onwards. A settler would disappear or be found dead, and then a small homestead would be on the chopping block. A soldier might go AWOL for no reason, and then a patrol would disappear. Most of it was blamed on Native Americans, and the army would then conduct severe reprisals as a result. But by the turn of the century, most Native American tribes were relocated and contained, and yet the killings continued. They were escalating, in fact. But after 1909, the incidents all but vanished. There were still sporadic incidents, but maybe one or two every decade, as opposed to dozens every year. Well, guess what came out that year? Yeah, that was a bit of a leap even for me. The penny was stopping a killer mist. Does the quarter keep away zombies too? I was almost back to considering April a kook when she read a statement supplied to her by a Navajo chieftain she'd interviewed 15 years ago. The chieftain was the great-grandson of Great Black Bear, a Native American who'd been invited to a clandestine meeting with some federal officers back in 1905. When the U.S. Army had found itself unable to stem the killings in the West and realized it wasn't Indians, they'd finally turned to the Native Americans for help in identifying their enemy. In exchange for some concessions that unfortunately didn't last long, Great Black Bear told them the unsettling truth. April gave me a copy of the statement from Great Black Bear. Let me read it to you now. In Navajo, they are called Anaye. In Zuni, they are the Atasia. The Mosopelea call them Yeho. It all means the same. Demons. There have always been demons here. They are spirits that wait in the shadows, spirits that hate the living. Why they are here, where they come from, no one can say. They thrive in the dead places where nature has faltered and withered. Are they created in those life voids, or are they merely attracted to those places? No one can say. Just like famine and tornadoes, earthquakes and fire, they exist. No knife can harm them and no arrow can touch them, but they can kill you with impunity. They have to be repelled, you see. Most of the trinkets and songs and prayers of our tribes had the power to keep the demons at bay. The faith of our people was encapsulated within our culture and our totems. The totems kept the power even when our chants were silent, driving the demons away from the living. They were small things, easily broken and forgotten, but they created powerful ripples in the spirit realm that no demon could overpower. But the tribes are faltering, their numbers dwindle, and the children are not allowed to practice their culture. The white man has its faith, but it's not a faith the demons recognize. The white man prays, but their prayers are divided and conflicting. There is no unity, no acquiescence to spirits or the land. White man creates more dead places, and the demons grow numerous. White man ignores the demons, and they grow stronger. If white man continues down this path, the demons will eventually take you all. No gun will hurt them, and no wall will impede them. They will come. And that's the gist of what he said. I guess our government listened, but rather than attempting to tell millions of citizens that they had to change their ways or else they'd be done in by killer spirits, they came up with an alternative. If the Native Americans had used totems that kept the spirits at bay, why couldn't we? If our religious symbols couldn't hack it, maybe we could invent a symbol everyone could get behind, something everyone could carry around in his or her pocket, something most Americans could believe in, that enough people would believe in to make it work. If there was a herb that the Native Americans cultivated, one every single tribe maintained or traded for, if it's in botany books, it's under a different name than what we call it. According to Great Black Bear, the government codenamed it Danake, after the type of coin you give the ferryman on your way to the land of the dead. If you wanted your totem or trinket to send away the demons, you needed to rub the oil from the herb all over it. April told me that. Through her contacts, she had learned that the federal government managed to cultivate the herb while their scientists studied it for an applicable use. That's how they discovered that Danake bonds with copper. You know, if the government had been more honest about the whole Lincoln Penny affair, maybe we'd be okay right now. I mean, these things are coming out in waves. They're everywhere now. Everywhere the penny isn't. I guess they've grown a lot after a century of civilization wreaking havoc on the environment. Once the penny's good vibes started to fade away, there wasn't anything holding them back. I saw videos of cops and soldiers emptying their guns into the things, but the spirits would just fly right up to them, and then there'd be blood spraying all over. Every part of the spirit turns into a jagged blade, and they stab you all over. Oh, the bodies, everywhere, all over the news. Blood and bodies. Oh, by this point I wasn't sure if up was down or left was right. I definitely didn't know who was nuttier, April or me for listening to her. As to how the penny could ward off the spirits, considering that no one would believe in them as spirit charms. She had an answer for that too, though she admitted that it was just her own theory. I mean, how do you even test out an idea like... The next segment of the tape has experienced severe degradation. Source of the damage is unclear. The amount of elapsed time is unknown. The subject appears to be in an agitated state when recording resumes. Jesus, okay, I'm still here, still recording. Jeez. I'll record as long as I can, but that's not going to be much longer. I don't want them getting to me. Please, God, I do not want them getting to me. I just saw one push through the north wall. The thing, it's just like the pictures, all smoke and anger. The hissing gets louder when they try, but they can't get through, not all the way. They're trying, though. Good God, I can see them pushing and thrashing at the walls, at the ceiling, at the floor. I'm sitting on top of the table now. Can't put my feet down. I don't know how long the table will support me. It's a cheap one, and I'm not that small a guy. Maybe I should have seen this coming. It's what April told me before I left her house. Fancy herbs and national icons are all well and good, but positive energy is what keeps the charms active. Not belief. April was adamant about that. Well, belief helps, but it doesn't solve the problem. The sun comes up no matter what we believe. The seasons change no matter what we believe. It's not belief, it never was. But good feelings, they are the things that radiate. Feeling good about an icon is what does it. The Native Americans felt good about their culture, so their charms worked. In the penny we found our own national charm. Individually they were small change, but when you have billions upon billions of small change, it adds up pretty quickly. Those spirits could only get through where the wards were at their weakest, and they were at their strongest. And it worked for decades. You know, if the government had been more honest about the whole Lincoln Penny affair, maybe we would be okay right now. I mean, these things are coming out in waves now. But this is our government. You know, more concerned with appealing to their voters, me-first mentality than suggesting that we might need a course of correction. Besides, who'd believe that the penny was keeping a spectral invasion force in check? Hell, does anyone in the government even know the truth any longer? The eastern half of the country should be okay. They still have their pennies in circulation. But seeing that the spirits are starting to bust through my defenses, maybe it's like what happened to the Native Americans. When you have fewer people, your charms don't work as well. Now, if it's all the same to you folks listening, I'm not the type that likes to record his final moments. I've got a gun with a full mag, but bullets won't do diddly, at least not to them. Just tell this story to anyone who can do something with it. Tell my ex-wife, if she's still alive, that I had a good idea for once. And if you can forgive the cheesiness of my final words, just make sure to keep a little change in your pocket. It might do you some good. Recording ends. My former best friend, Lucifer. I lived in a small mountainside town in Arizona, the type with under 2,000 residents where most people knew each other. While it was awfully beautiful with its lake and wooded mountain, I've dreaded the place ever since the incident. I was a young adult when it happened, around 20 if I remember correctly, so some parts are foggy. Now, 17 years later was the first time I felt comfortable enough to talk about it without feeling like grief, anger, or the need to cry would overtake me. I started going to a therapist a week ago, and he recommended that I wrote everything I remember down, and maybe share it anonymously so that could help letting go. So that's what I'm doing right now. For the sake of anonymity, I'm going to change everyone's names except for my former best friend's first name, and I won't mention my town's name. I'll start at the very beginning with how I met my best friend. Well, as I mentioned, most people knew most people in our town. Not quite literally, but everyone knew the people in their neighborhoods. I was around 12 years old when Mrs. Davis, who lived 2 streets from ours, died. We went to the same church, and I helped her a few times with grocery shopping, so we were invited to the church's memorial for her. We didn't know much about Mrs. Davis, but we did know her house was passed down to her son and his family. This piqued my interest, as there weren't any new faces around here, hadn't been since I was born. When we were in church, I immediately noticed the new family. They even had a son who looked around my age. This boy was soon to be my best friend. He was the type of guy who, even as a child, unintentionally drew everyone's attention to him. The type who you first noticed in a crowd of people, even if you weren't looking for him. Or, well, that's how I thought of him. Given how I once looked at him, I felt unable to look away. After a few minutes of staring, he looked back at me, which made me turn away, trying to play it cool, like I wasn't just staring at him. After a bit, I took another glance at him, only to find he was still looking at me with a raised eyebrow. I turned away a lot less smoother than last time, feeling my cheeks heat up a bit thanks to the embarrassment of getting caught. I didn't dare look at him again for the rest of the memorial. But as I was a child, and children don't have as much shame and social limitation as everyone else, I went up to him when it ended. His parents smiled at me, the kind of smile which was sincere but tired and worn out, and took a few steps away to leave us alone to socialize. "Why were you looking at me?" he asked, twiddling his sleeve as he looked into my eyes. I felt a blush creeping up my cheeks again from embarrassment, and looked down at my shoes. I just haven't seen you around before. You're the only new kid I've ever met." I laughed a bit. I had a bad habit of giggling or laughing whenever I felt some sort of stress. "Do you have a name?" He didn't sound mad or uncomfortable, so I regained my courage. "Yeah, it's Emmett. What's yours?" I smiled at him. I won't tell you just yet. People don't like my name." This took me by surprise. He didn't sound arrogant or like he didn't think I was good enough to know. He sounded more sad than anything else. As I opened my mouth to ask why wouldn't they, his mother stepped back to us and apologetically smiled at me before ushering her boy away. I later learned that there was a small gathering in their house for close family and friends and that they had to go. A week later, my parents and I paid the Davis family a visit with a home-cooked pie to welcome them to our small town, and because I had mentioned how I wanted to be friends with the new boy. I wasn't overly social. While I had a fair share of friends, I was never all that close with any of them, so of course my parents were thrilled to hear I actually wanted to get to know someone. Plus, they thought it was nice that I'd befriended the new boy, who must have been feeling lost and lonely in a new environment. We went over, and after some formalities came the introduction. Looking back, I now understand why my friend hated sharing his name with others. "I'm Martha, and this is Lucifer. My husband Paul isn't home right now, but I'm sure you'll see him around some other time." The woman smiled at my parents, who seemed to freeze. You see, my parents, just like the whole town, were really religious. "Lucifer? What an interesting choice of name for your child," said my mother with a kind of condescending tone. I'm not sure if Martha picked up on it. It was rather subtle, but the boy, Lucifer, who had been standing by his mother until then, slightly moved behind her as if to hide. I offered him a small smile, which he shyly returned. "Oh, yes, I get that a lot. We chose this name for its original worth. Before his fall, Lucifer Archangel was God's favorite and the most beautiful out of all the angels. His sin was that he loved God too much. We picked it in hopes that our Luce would follow in his steps to love God more than any human. Maria tried to explain with the same tired and apologetic smile I'd seen on her yesterday. I believed her, she seemed sincere enough, but I could tell my parents didn't, even if they were smiling again. I knew when they were sincere and when they weren't. After that, the atmosphere got tense, and a few minutes later my parents made up some bullshit excuse to leave. But me, being a rather stubborn child, I insisted on achieving my goal of becoming friends with Lucifer. So I whined to my mother to let me stay and play with him. Well, my parents weren't happy about it, but after some pleading from both me and Martha, they let me stay for a few hours. I'm sure they secretly hoped I wouldn't get on well with Lucifer. But we did. In fact, we became best friends and were inseparable until our 20s. While we couldn't go to the same class, as he was 2 years younger than me, we still went to the same school, so we played together at recess, ate lunch together, and always went to school and then home together. At first I called him Luce, like his mother, but with the years Luce became Lucy. It started out as a joke, but after a bit it grew on me, and I started calling him it unironically. The first time it happened, it earned me a laugh from him, and I went red with realization and embarrassment, but he said he liked Lucy, if it didn't have a teasing tone to it. Well, I'd looked up to Lucy from the first time I talked with him. He was so unapologetically himself, and he owned his name. When I was around 15 and he was 13, he explained why. Well, you see, Emmett, people will judge me before they even get to know me because of my name. And they'll still judge me after they get to know me. And thanks to my name, they'll always think badly of me no matter what I do. So it's unnecessary to cater to everyone around me because it won't change a thing. He said something like that, if I recall correctly. He lived by this philosophy and just didn't care what people thought about him, and I admired him for it. He was out of the ordinary, which made him more interesting than anyone else. But most people didn't see him like that. Like he said, they judged everything he did, and even if the kids slowly warmed up to him at first, they still kept their distance, and the adults didn't give him a chance. The older we got, the meaner the kids got with him. He was never outright bullied, though. He was just outcasted, and a lot of rumors spread about him. He didn't mind them. He even found entertainment in some rather radical ones, like how he was the Antichrist, or how he brought a curse on the town when he moved here. I, on the other hand, got frustrated with all these lies, and for the first year I tried defending him to no avail. I stopped after he asked me to. He was perfectly capable of defending himself and standing up for himself when he needed to, but he knew fighting the rumors would be like tilting at windmills. I remember one that was the most widely accepted, to the point even parents and teachers believed it was true. It was that he was gay. Well, he never addressed this one with me, so after some months I asked him if it was true. He asked me if I believed it, to which I hesitantly shrugged. Well, are you? Because the rumor started thanks to how much I hang out with you. People think we're dating, so if I'm gay, you must be too. I understandably nodded and apologized, now feeling guilty for it and also stupid for asking. Stop. You aren't at fault more than I am. Look, I hang out with you as much as you hang out with me. He carelessly laughed and I smiled. I realized that it didn't matter at all, so it never came up again. I was in 10th grade when I got my first girlfriend. My parents were thrilled, and I was sure they'd already started planning our wedding when I first told them the news. Especially how they also heard the Lucifer is gay rumor and got quite concerned with how close we were. She was a 15-year-old girl from Lucy's class. Let's call her Grace. Some weeks before we started dating, Lucy told me a girl was interested in me because she'd been asking a lot about me. Later she told me it was because she saw me every day with Lucy and found me cute. We started talking then, eventually dating. She was a nice girl. I can't say anything bad about her, really. Well, we didn't date for longer than 4 months, I think. The longer I was with her, the more distant Lucy became, to which, in response, the gloomier I got. He said it was so that he wouldn't hog me from Grace. Now, I don't remember if I believed him or not. I broke up with Grace saying that it was me, not her, and while I loved hanging out with her, I just didn't feel the spark. She tried to talk me out of it, begged me to give us a bit more time, and then got angry and said it must be over Lucifer. The shitstorm that caused. I got a lot of scolding from my parents, and the upset Grace told everyone she broke up with me because she caught me making out with Lucy, which, needless to say, wasn't true, but everyone believed it. After this, I fell back into my normal routine of hanging out with Lucy. He didn't care about the rumors, and I was just happy that my friend was no longer so distant from me. Even though I told both Grace and myself Lucifer had nothing to do with why I broke up with her, now, if I look back at it, he had everything to do with it. While Grace was nice, she wasn't even close to being as interesting and intriguing as Lucy was. I found myself missing him and wishing to talk with him instead of her 2 months into dating. In the end, I chose his company over Grace's. As much as I would have denied it as a teenager, Lucy had the biggest impact on me. I followed him in everything and would have doubted myself for seeing the sky as blue if he told me it was pink, which is honestly strange. I was never an impressionable person, and no one had this big of an effect on me beside Lucy to this day. He was really interested in everything supernatural. He'd constantly talk about some new cryptid he'd read about, or tell a chilling ghost story, which he never seemed to run out of. He read a ton of books about mythology, urban legends, and the like. Whenever I visited family, I always secretly bought him new ones, as our religious little town didn't have more than a few. After a bit, I found myself also interested in the occult. Lucy also wasn't a Christian. He once told me how he thought the Bible was bullshit, and that he didn't want to believe in a God that is as cruel as the Christian one, which is kind of ironic with his name. At the time, I took major offense to this, but after listening to his reasoning, I couldn't help but agree with him, and then on I loathed going to church and no longer prayed, just pretending to do so. I can't determine what religion Lucy was part of. He seemed to believe in something new every other month. But if I had to categorize him, I'd say he was some sort of polytheist pagan who believed in every god but in no church. I always prayed with him to some new god he liked, or did some ancient ritual he just read about with him. It didn't matter that I didn't necessarily believe in any of them. I did it because it seemed important to him. Well, now that you know all the basics of my friendship with Lucifer and his personality, I think I can get into the incident that happened. Even though our town was religious, it still had its fair share of urban legends. The most notable one was the man who took children. Now, in a nutshell, the man who took children was a crazed man living in the surrounding forest, who lived off raw flesh, and who attacked and then ate children who went too far into the forest alone, especially at night. As teenagers, we knew it was only created to scare off the children from going into the woods, getting lost and dying either from a wild animal or hypothermia. Or, well, that's what we all believed. Lucy wasn't as interested in it as I would have expected. He simply said it must be a Wendigo and left it at that. I think he was afraid of it, even if he wouldn't admit it, and we agreed it was a made-up tale. He never went into the woods at night, and he wouldn't let me do so either. Not even when I wouldn't have been alone, as some friends would call me to go camping with them. I never ridiculed Lucy for believing in it, though, and I always complied. When Lucy turned 18, we went hiking. We did that a lot given how there wasn't much else to do in a mountainside town. But this was new because we went further than we usually did, and we went off the beaten track. After a couple of hours of walking, we got to a nice small clearing, which seemed to be the end of our made-up path. If you stood with your back to the mountain, there was an edge to both the right side and in front of you, so it was a steep drop on both sides. Plus the mountain behind was too icy to climb and too steep to walk up without problems. So we decided to stop for a bit before heading back. The landscape with the pine trees, the lake beside our town, and the small, sun-drenched rooftops and roads of our town were all beautiful. But after taking a look around, I noticed something. There was a bush on the edge of the clearing, but something was off about it. I got closer and was taken back by what I saw. The bush was decorated with small skulls. They looked like baby skulls, but not quite. On their surface were a lot of small circular markings which felt like the surface of teeth. I was about to gag when a huge migraine kicked in. The world went black for a second before I saw images flickering before my eyes. They were fast, and I was afraid of getting some sort of seizure caused by the constant light changes. I can't remember exactly what the images I saw were. I just remember them being very unsettling. Dead animals, the dark forest, running people, crawling maggots, and a faceless man is all I can call back, and even thinking about them now makes my head throb. I must have fallen because when I started regaining my senses again, Lucy was desperately trying to pull me up to my feet while saying we needed to leave immediately. After a few seconds, I managed to get up again, and we started hurrying back. It didn't take long until we heard a scream. It wasn't like any I've ever heard. It sounded like it had come from two sources at exactly the same time. One was a resonating deep howl, and the other was a high-pitched screech. We looked back and saw a thing sprinting towards us. Ever since the rumors and bad looks had started when we were young, I'd slowly developed this protectiveness over Lucy, so my first thought was about how I could save him. After taking some sharp turns in the woods, long ignoring the path, I heard him wheeze for air. While he was in shape, he wasn't cut out for running more than 2 minutes straight. On impulse, I stopped, making him bump into me, and pushed him into a fallen trunk that looked big enough to cover him. I didn't give him enough time to say anything. Don't move and stay hidden until you can't hear me and that thing anymore. Then start running through the woods and don't stop till you're home, okay? I whispered to him before I started running back to the path, shouting and bringing as much attention to myself as I could, anything to get it away from Lucy. That was the first time I saw him cry and look so powerless. I ran for what seemed like hours with that hellish monster at my heels, when I reached a bigger clearing. As our town was a famous tourist spot for hikers, this clearing had a small building with toilets in it. You know, the kind which had 4 small toilet stalls, which looked like the ones in public schools. Well, I ran in the building and tried hiding in a stall behind a closed door. The creature clumsily came after me in the building and tried its hardest to get me out of that damn stall. This was the first time that I got a clear look at it. It had long, thin arms, but small legs, which reminded me of a child's legs, just with freakishly long feet. It had long claws and kept clawing at the stall door. A non-stop screaming started sounding like "ouch" over and over again after a while, which brought back the same throbbing headache from before. It ripped off the door's outer handle, but couldn't make the door nudge. I crawled up in a ball on the toilet seat, as far away from the door as humanly possible, when it started reaching in from both above and under. Then it tried poking its head in. Oh God, the face was the most terrible part of it. It had thin black hair clinging to its scalp in patches. Its eyes looked like sunken-in frog eyes that were on the sides of its face, too far from each other and one slightly above the other. Its mouth was small and was filled with small, blunt teeth, and it looked like it had large cuts across its face, starting from its hairline, and it had a large hole where a human's nose would have been. I still have no idea how its face stayed together. I prayed to all gods and spirits that Lucy had told me about to keep me safe. The monster stayed there with me for a while, so I wasn't as worried about Lucy as I was before. I believed he'd had enough time to escape. At the time, the thought of him arriving home safe was worth me getting killed by this thing. After that, everything got blurry. I think I blacked out from the stress and pain. I woke up God knows how long later to banging on the door. I went into flight mode instantly, but relaxed a bit when I recognized the town's police chief's voice. After a small talk with him, I felt like it was safe for me to go out. I got let out of the building and saw a lot of people from the town. Apparently my parents got worried when I didn't come home last night. And so they got some people to come and search for me. "Is Lucy okay?" was my first actual question after someone wrapped me in a blanket. I must have looked pitiful in that blanket with how dirty I was from running through the woods, and with how afraid and worried I must have looked. But at the time, I couldn't care. "Lucy?" The chief scratched his face, furrowing his brows. "Oh, yeah, of course. Only I called him Lucy. I meant Lucifer. Lucifer Davis. He was with me yesterday. Is he okay?" I asked a bit faster and more panicked than I'd intended. The chief shook his head, and I felt my stomach drop. They wouldn't let me search with them, they just escorted me back to the town. My parents clung to me and wouldn't let me go for a long time. They were both crying and kept thanking God for bringing me back to safety while I was too in shock to react, let alone to say or feel anything. The next day I led the search party to where we'd found the skull bush, which no longer had anything on it. Then I showed them the fallen trunk I tried hiding Lucy behind. He wasn't there. The third day I told my parents and the police everything. They concluded that it must have been a bear or some sort of wild animal. Trauma was tricking my mind. But I insisted it was the man who took children, but they just prayed for me. I stopped talking after that. At the end of the first week, the search parties were called off, and after finding nothing, they were said to be unsuccessful. The official police report said Lucifer Davis either died from hypothermia or was ripped apart by a wild animal. I didn't believe it. I knew Lucy was still alive. I just knew it. At the end of the second week, it was the first time I'd seen Martha and Paul Davis since the incident. They looked as numb, empty and worn out as I felt. I saw them at Lucy's official funeral. They buried an empty casket as his body was still missing. I didn't say more than was absolutely necessary, and I could tell my parents were getting really worried about me. The day after the funeral was the breakthrough. It was Wednesday, if I remember correctly, but I can't say for sure. I wasn't willing to go to school or even really get out of bed since coming home, so the days kind of blended together. This day was different, however. Lucifer's parents came over, and they loudly demanded to see me. After some shouting, I dragged myself downstairs to see what was going on. "It's your fault. My baby would never have gotten into trouble if it wasn't for you. You got my Lucifer killed." Martha, the once soft-spoken and calm woman who I'd seen as a second mother, was completely hysterical and shrieked as soon as she saw me. I'm sure she would have launched at me if her husband wasn't holding her back, who was also glaring daggers at me. "Lucifer is dead." "Bullshit. It's your hellspawn's fault. He's been bringing bad luck to the town ever since you moved here. Such a sinful demon shouldn't have stepped a foot into our good God-fearing town to begin with," my father screamed back. My mother kept him back from throwing punches. "Lucifer is dead." The screaming and arguing continued. They no longer cared about me being there, just standing there totally motionless. I stopped listening to what they were saying. Lucifer is dead. My migraine started coming back, which made me wince. Lucifer is dead. I caught some words my father was saying. Hellspawn. Finally he's back in hell where he belongs. He deserved it. My son will finally be free. And demon, among other insults. Then I also caught the similar insults aimed at me, about how it should have been me instead of him. Well, my numbness was cracking as I felt the first emotion in 2 weeks. Anger. My blood boiled with fury. Lucifer is dead. Slap. The room was filled with silence, like time had stopped, and all eyes were on me. I didn't even realize I'd moved and slapped my father, especially not as hard as I did. My palm hurt afterwards, but I paid no attention to it. With time, I also felt my blood freeze and all my anger go away. For a moment, I felt nothing again before realization hit me like a truck. My Lucy was dead. I loved him. I didn't think before I spoke, it just slipped out of my mouth. My confession took everyone, including me, by surprise. This broke me. How stupid could I have been? Not even realizing I was in love with my best friend. And I never told him. I never told him how much he meant to me, and I'll never get the chance to do so. I felt tears roll down my cheeks before my legs gave out and I fell to the ground, bawling my eyes out. I screamed and whined and cried, not caring who could hear me. Such a deep sorrow and guilt took over me. I thought I'd die from the pain. I felt like it was my fault he'd died because I couldn't protect him. Martha was right. I should have died that day, not him. And now I'll never see his face again. I'll never go on adventures with him, or hear his laughter and stories, or do anything with him ever again. I was so sure he'd make it out alive. I didn't even say bye. That was the last time I spoke with the Davis family. They said nothing else during my breakdown and probably left soon after it started, but I didn't notice. They moved away 2 weeks later, and that was the last time I'd heard from them. I moved away a year later too. Where am I now? I still live in Arizona, where it's always warm and it never snows. I haven't gone hiking once in the last 17 years, and the only times I've gone back to my hometown is on Lucy's birthday to put flowers on his grave, which I do every year, and when my father died due to an accident. I still think about him, but it no longer hurts. It's just a kind of dull ache I've grown used to by now. I'm still interested in the occult, but I no longer believe in any gods. I've gone to college and work a full-time job now. I even tried dating, which didn't work out for the most part. I keep looking for Lucy in everyone I meet. I guess he put my expectations a bit too high. But I have been going regularly to this one coffee shop for the past few months before work. One of the baristas caught my eyes. She has the same dark brown eyes and the same shade of dirty blonde hair that Lucifer had. Her name tag says Abby, and she recognizes and smiles at me when I arrive every morning. I might try my luck with her. If things work out and I start going out with her, hopefully she wouldn't mind me calling her Lucy. Now, thank you for listening to my story. Oh, before I go, I want to confess something. I lied about why I started seeing a therapist. A week ago I started waking up in a cold sweat to that unmistakable 2-pitch scream. I could swear I can faintly see the monster's face in the corner of my room for just a few seconds after waking up, a bit closer each night. After that it's complete silence, and the only thing I can hear before the outside world's noises flood back in is a barely loud enough whisper from me to hear, which sounds an awful lot like Lucifer. It says, "Run!" So, 4 stories for you this evening, because why the hell not? All of them based in Arizona, set there, and, well, just seemed like a good theme, to be honest with you. So why not for this beautiful, beautiful November Friday evening? So, started podcasting, and quite a few of you are paying a bit of interest. If you haven't discovered them yet, then please head over Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you may care to find your podcast from. I'll be there for you. Wait. Now, in the first few weeks, I've been basically revamping stuff I've done here on the channel, but in forthcoming episodes, it'll be a mix of new stuff exclusive to the podcasts and some stories I've read here before, so hopefully that'll pique your interests. Well, that's enough for me for, what is it? It's Friday already, isn't it? Oh my god, what happened to this week? But I will be back again with you very, very soon. Sunday evening. What do you feel like? Let me know in the comment section below, and that will be your Sunday evening treat. Till then, my dear friends, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.